Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Another pretty quick video for you as we go through and install this T5 using Modern Driveline's components into my 64 Mercury Comet. So in this video, we're gonna have a lot of time lapses, but we're gonna have a lot of vocals, me explaining the individual steps because there's some things I messed up, some things I learned, things that would be useful for you guys doing this to your car. So this video is going to be the bell housing install. It is going to be the slave cylinder install, the throwout bearing, the clutch fork, all that stuff is going in. The transmission is going in. We're going to tell you what to do with the right type of mount to use. What can be reused, drive shaft length, all that stuff, starter wiring, reverse light wiring. You know, in about 10 minutes, you're gonna really have a good understanding of what needs to happen to get your transmission into your car and hooked up so that it works properly. So without further ado, let's get to it.
This is a really good example of reading the instructions but not fully understanding the instructions. Basically what I'm about to do here, don't do. Everything I'm doing with the bracket to measure and get everything lined up right is great, especially if you have the bell housing out of the car, but I make a fatal mistake here, which I'll tell you about in a second.
I hate to admit it, mistakes were made. If I zoom in down here, basically this bracket, I didn't realize this, but it's drilled and tapped. I think I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt on both sides. So the instructions kind of assume you're doing this with it in the car, so you can't get the drill on the inside. You have to mark and flip, but I'm like, oh, I can just line it up and just drill it here, the correct orientation, the holes will be perfect, which they were perfect, except for, I'm pretty sure that metal bracket had tapped holes. So when I went with my 21/64 bit, I wiped those threads. I could either have welded this up and drilled new holes and tapped them myself, but that's kind of a pain. So I went out and I got some nylock lock washers. And I want to pay attention. I don't want to put the bolt through too far because that could create an issue. Maybe that's why they drill and tap them in the first place. I'm not really sure, but I'm going to try and make it work. I bought some new bolts. I might flip them around, put the nylock washers on the other side. We'll see. I'm going to try and be careful. Hopefully I don't mess myself up. I'll check the clearances once I get the bell housing in the car.
So rather than welding up the bracket or anything like that, I decided to just use some nylock nuts and bolts I got from the hardware store. I was very careful to make sure that the distance that the bolt stuck through, even if it was done correctly with the tapped holes, is no further with the nuts I put on. So there should be no clearance issues. I double checked that. But again, you shouldn't have to do it just like this. You shouldn't need nuts in your case. At this point, I decided to stop, clean everything up, move the transmission around, and just test fit the bell housing. As you can see, I got it upside down there for a second, freaked myself out, but then I spun it around correctly and everything lined up great. Okay, for this next part, you really do want to pay attention to the instructions. You see me greasing up the pivot stud there. It is very crucial that pivot stud is a certain distance away, and the instructions tell you what that is, so I had to make kind of a custom shim for that to work. Then you're installing the throwout bearing. Again, follow the instructions very closely. They tell you where to put grease, and it's not everywhere, so you do kind of want to be careful. And then just start throwing everything together. You don't need to adjust anything yet on the slave until you get it in the car, which I actually don't do until much later. Installing the bell housing, as you can imagine, it's not rocket science. There are different length bolts. So the two that go up at the top right around 12 o'clock are smaller, or shorter, I should say, than the others, and there are some bolts that need to come in from the front. Okay, this next part was extremely stupid. The T5 transmission is pretty light, and I thought, you know what, I don't have a transmission jack, why don't I just pick it up, throw it on my shoulder, and toss it in there? Honestly, I wouldn't recommend this. I got the volume turned down, but I'm grunting a lot here. I had to duck under everything. And you want it, the car high enough. I don't know, it just wasn't a good idea. So I would recommend not doing this. If you have a friend maybe, but probably not by yourself.
So I went and made myself a little makeshift transmission jack. Having done this a couple times before, you want to try and match the angle that the transmission is angled back with the transmission. So it's 86 degrees, it's basically 4 degrees back. So I've tilted this 4 degrees back, which means I had to come up and prop it up. I'll show you some pictures, but I counterbored a hole, took the top off my jack, was able to thread it in. Ideally this would be made out of steel. This is not something you'd want to do a ton, but we'll see. It might work for the time being, just trying to wiggle it in there. If it seems too sketchy, we'll stop, but I'm gonna lower the car down, give this a shot. I tried to lift it and put it in there, but that just did not work.
Okay, so obviously the ideal situation here would be I would have a telescoping transmission jack so I could do this not on my back, but I couldn't get one in time and they're kind of expensive, so this sort of works. Anyone who's done this before knows you have to get everything perfectly lined up for it to go into place. If the splines are binding, if your jack doesn't go high enough, it ain't gonna work. So you'll see me do this like 4 different times trying to get it all lined up. I had the jack at the maximum height, but it wasn't tall enough. I tried to shim up with stuff. Eventually it's just kind of luck, and take your time here. Once you get it to go in, it is a great feeling, and eventually I was able to get it to slide in.
So as it turns out, the transmission mount that they supplied doesn't work. It's not even close. You'd have to extend this. This doesn't line up. So just for the heck of it, I tested. Now, I went and bought a new one, but I tested the automatic transmission mount and it fit fine. It actually fit great. So I'm gonna wind up reusing the AOD mount and also just this, little bushing. So just so you know, this comes out of like late 70s to mid 80s F-150s. It's about 12 bucks. The one thing I'll note is the one I pulled out, these were metric, these were M12s, and now they're a 7/16, 14, so I had to get different nuts. I also had to make up a spacer. Now again, ideally this would just be 1 block of aluminum, or something hard, but you have to kind of pick the thickness. I can't tell you, this is a 1/2 inch, but for you it's gonna be whatever it's gonna be. And what I'm trying to do is make it so that the angle down on the transmission matches the angle up on the rear end, for driveline, longevity and to reduce vibration and all that stuff. So this wound up being a 1/2 inch, and we'll install this, which meant I had to get longer bolts because with the extra 1/2 inch it wouldn't fit. So these are 7/16, 14 bolts. So with the new mount, basically the bolts go into the transmission and the nuts are the same size, but on my other one they weren't. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so I haven't had the camera on, and I just want to show you kind of some of the progress here. I was preoccupied, I sold the old transmission. Basically, your drive shaft will work. So the drive shaft length is the same. Now I'm gonna get a new drive shaft made just because I noticed my slip yoke has some pretty bad grooves in it, and I don't want to damage this new seal and develop a leak. But I measured the distance from the center line of the bolt holes to the face of the tail housing, and it's the same for the AOD as it is for the T5, so you can use your drive shaft. Anyways, just things to consider. We move up here to the front. I've got to put the starter back in. I've got to wire my reverse lights, as well as remove the hookup for the neutral safety switch. So instead of a wire going into the transmission and then back out to the starter solenoid, we're just going to have the wire come straight into the starter solenoid. So I'll get that hooked up, and then I will hook up everything for the reverse lights, and we'll be getting pretty close to done underneath the car, with the exception of the clutch will need to be adjusted. I gotta get that all sorted out. So I took the little harness they gave me, put a weather pack on the other end, and that'll hook up to what I had installed right here for the AOD. This will go away, and I'll just have one purple wire that'll hook to the starter. So that'll actually clean up the wiring to the starter, because there's no neutral safety switch because it's a stick. And then this is just long enough. I thought I was gonna have to add on, but I didn't have to add on any wiring to make this work. And then this is what you buy. This just clips on. I might throw some dielectric grease in here and just pop that in. All right, everybody, that's just gonna about wrap up this video. As you can see, we got the transmission in. I'm actually a little bit behind with my videos. I've got the next stuff all filmed. So right now it's pretty much all in there ready to drive. I tried bleeding the master cylinder, which is installed. That'll be the next video. So in the next video, I will show you the master cylinder install in detail. And I can tell you that is the most frustrating step, just because you're working in tight spots, you're dealing with fluid. I got it all in, I was excited, I went to bleed it. That was a fiasco. It needs to be re-bled, so I can't drive. I was hoping I'd be able to drive it today, but I can't. I need to go to the hardware store to pick up some stuff, but that'll all be in the next video. So do me a big favor, guys. If you're new to my channel, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and we'll have another video out for you soon. And in the next video, with any luck, either the next one or the one after that, we will be out driving this thing, breaking the new clutch. See you guys next time on Truck and Roll.